The median American sitting on the doorstep of retirement right now, meaning between 55 and 64 years old, has $185,000 saved. The target most financial planners use to fund a 30-year retirement is $1.46 million. That gap isn't a planning problem. It's a structural collapse happening in slow motion, and the math of how your specific number survives the next 3 decades is dramatically more complicated than any retirement calculator you've ever seen has shown you. Here's the thing nobody sat down and explained clearly. You can do everything right on the savings side and still run out of money. Not because you failed, because you were handed the wrong framework for thinking about the problem. I'm going to walk you through the real math today, the actual variables, the ones that determine whether your money outlives you or you outlive your money. And I'm going to show you 3 things that conventional retirement planning doesn't build into its models. Things that, if you get them wrong, make a healthy looking portfolio go to 0 before you hit 85. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. Every retirement, when you strip away the noise, is really 2 countdowns running simultaneously. One counts down the years left in your life, the other counts down the dollars left in your account. The whole game is figuring out which one hits 0 first. The problem is you can only see one of them. I'm going to call this the 2 countdown problem. And I'm going to come back to it every time we introduce a new variable that quietly messes with the one you can't see. Let's start with the number you think you know, how much you actually have. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you why the most dangerous retirement mistake isn't the one you make with your investments, it's the one you make before you even touch them. But first, here's why the savings picture is even more broken than the headline numbers suggest. The average retirement savings for American families is $333,940, according to the Federal Reserve's 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances. Sounds survivable. Uncomfortable, but survivable. Except the average is a lie. The average is pulled upward by a small number of households with enormous balances. The honest number is the median, and the median is $87,000. $87,000. The median American aged 55 to 64, the cohort on the doorstep of retirement, has $185,000 in retirement savings. If you apply the standard 4% withdrawal rule to that number, you get $7,400 per year in retirement income from your portfolio. That is $616 a month before tax. The average Social Security retirement benefit in 2026 is approximately $1,976 per month after the 2.5% cost of living adjustment. So the median picture looks like this: $616 from your portfolio plus $1,976 from Social Security equals roughly $2,500 a month before healthcare, before inflation, before anything unexpected. American retirees think their peers need an average of $823,800 in savings and investments to retire comfortably in 2026. The reality? Current retirees have an average of just $288,700 saved, barely a third of the amount they feel new retirees require. And here's the part that's almost impossible to read. A majority of retirees, 51%, say they have no plan if their retirement savings run out. And 43% say they would prefer to die than have that happen. That's not just a financial statistic. That's a mental health crisis hiding inside a spreadsheet. But let's set aside the people who clearly don't have enough. The video you're watching right now isn't really for them, and you know it. You're watching this because you think you might be okay, but you're not entirely sure. Maybe you have $300,000 saved, maybe $500,000, maybe $1 million. You've done what you were supposed to do, more or less, and you still have this nagging feeling that the math doesn't quite add up. You're right, it doesn't, and here's why. The 2 countdown problem isn't really about the dollar amount in your account. It's about 3 invisible variables that are slowly shortening the clock you can't see. Most people plan around one of them. Almost nobody builds a model around all 3. Let's get into the first one. There is a story about a retired engineer in Phoenix. I'll call him Raymond. Raymond did everything the conventional way, contributed to his 401k for 35 years, hired a financial advisor, retired in 2002, at 63 with $800,000 in his portfolio. His advisor ran the numbers. With the 4% rule, that's $32,000 a year in withdrawals. Social Security on top. He was fine on paper. He ran out of money at 78, not because he spent recklessly, because he retired into the wrong market at the wrong time. 2002 was the tail end of the dot-com crash. His portfolio dropped 30% in the first 2 years of retirement. And because he kept withdrawing, he was selling shares at the exact moment when shares were most depleted. By the time the market recovered, he had fewer shares to participate in the recovery. The math had permanently broken. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it is the most underestimated threat in personal finance. Here's how it works and why it's so brutal. During your working years, the order of returns doesn't matter much. Whether you experience a 20% loss in year one, followed by a 25% gain in year two, or the reverse, your final balance will be the same if you're not making withdrawals. However, once you start taking money out of your portfolio, the sequence becomes critical. Consider two hypothetical retirees, each starting with $1 million, taking $40,000 in annual withdrawals, and achieving identical 6.5% average returns over a decade. The retiree experiencing early negative returns ends with $880,603, while the retiree with early gains accumulates $1,358,283, a difference driven purely by sequence. Same average returns, same starting balance, same withdrawal amount. One person ends with almost $500,000 more than the other. The only difference is luck. The luck of which decade you happen to retire into. Research by Wade Pfau estimates that approximately 77% of a portfolio's final retirement outcome can be explained by the returns of just the first 10 years. 77%. That means the decade you retire into explains almost everything about whether you run out of money, and you have essentially zero control over it. If your portfolio dropped by at least 15% during your first year of retirement, and you also withdrew 3.3% of the balance, that combination would increase your odds of depleting the portfolio within 30 years by 6 times, compared with someone who has a first-year positive return. According to a 2022 Morningstar report, 6 times the odds of going broke. From one bad year at the start, poor early returns devastate portfolios. Negative returns during the first 5 years account for 70% of retirement plan failures, creating a compounding depletion effect that limits recovery potential even when markets eventually rebound. Think about that. The first 5 years of retirement are the danger zone. Your first 5 years of retirement are the danger zone for tapping accounts during a downturn, according to Amy Arnott, a portfolio strategist with Morningstar Research Services. So you've spent 35 years doing the right thing. And then whether your retirement works or not depends significantly on what the market does in the specific 5-year window when you happen to stop working. That is a system that is deeply unfair, and I find the absurdity of it genuinely hilarious in a very dark way. Now you're probably thinking, okay, the 4% rule accounts for this, right? The whole point of the rule is to survive even the worst historical scenarios? Sort of. That's where it gets really interesting. Bill Bengen introduced the 4% rule in a 1994 paper published in the Journal of Financial Planning, based on historical U.S. stock and bond returns dating back to 1926. His research found that a retiree withdrawing 4% of a balanced portfolio in year one and adjusting for inflation each year after would not run dry over 30 years. The figure was rounded down from 4.15%, and it stuck as a default guideline for an entire generation of retirement planning. And then something funny happened. Nobody read the footnotes. The rule is built for a 30-year retirement. It is not built for a 40-year retirement. It is not built for someone who retires at 55. The original research was based on 30-year retirements. But what if you retire at 55 and live to 95? That's a 40-year retirement. Or what if you only need your money to last 20 years? The problem: longer retirements require lower withdrawal rates, while shorter retirements can support higher rates. With improving healthcare and longevity, many people face 35 to 40-year retirements, which may require a more conservative 3.5% withdrawal rate. For 2025, the 4% rule is considered slightly aggressive by many financial experts due to lower expected returns and higher market valuations compared to historical averages. Research from Morningstar, Vanguard, and Wade Fall suggests 3.3 to 3.7% may be more appropriate for new retirees today. 3.3% on a $500,000 portfolio is $16,500 a year. That's $1,375 a month from your savings. Remind me again why we're all planning around a number from a paper written before the internet existed. And then there's the thing Bengen himself admitted in December 2025. He told CNBC that he has since revised the figure upward, most recently suggesting 4.7% as the worst case historical safe withdrawal rate. He told CNBC in 2025 that retirees who stick with just 4% are likely cheating themselves a little bit of the retirement they earned. So the rule is simultaneously too high for long retirements and too low for short ones, too rigid for market downturns, and its own creator says most people misapply it. Other than that, great rule. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content, otherwise YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Now here's the part that the standard retirement advice machine almost never accounts for in any serious way. The 3 silent drains. I'm going to walk you through each one. Silent drain number 1 is inflation. This one feels obvious, but people consistently underestimate the math. At a 3% annual inflation rate, the cost of living doubles approximately every 24 years. So if you need $60,000 a year at 65, you'll need roughly $120,000 a year at 89 to buy the same stuff. Not more stuff, the same stuff. If you require $50,000 annually for expenses today, you'll need approximately $90,500 annually in 20 years, assuming 3% inflation just to maintain your current lifestyle. A retirement that requires $1 million in today's dollars would need about $1.8 million after 20 years of 3% inflation just to buy the same goods and services. And here's the cruel twist. Inflation is now running at roughly 3% a year, twice the target set by the Federal Reserve. The target for the last decade was 2%. We've been living above it. The models built on 2% historical inflation are already off. Silent drain number 2 is the healthcare gap, and this one is the one that destroys early retirement plans specifically. Health insurance can represent one of the largest expenses for individuals who retire before age 65. Monthly premiums of roughly $1,000 to $1,100 per person can meaningfully affect how long retirement savings last, especially when combined with other core costs such as housing, food, and transportation. Because these expenses occur before Medicare eligibility begins, early retirees often need to account for several years of higher healthcare costs when determining whether their retirement timeline is financially sustainable. That's $12,000 to $13,000 per year per person in premiums alone, before deductibles, before copays, before prescriptions. Paying about $12,000 to $13,000 per year in premiums per person can consume a notable portion of annual retirement income, particularly for households relying on withdrawals from savings or investments. Let me paint you a picture. A couple retires at 62. They have $1 million saved, they feel good, they need healthcare coverage until 65. That's 3 years of premiums for 2 people. 3 years times $24,000 per year is $72,000 from $1 million portfolio. Gone, before Medicare even kicks in. And that's if nothing goes wrong medically. Those enhanced ACA subsidies expired at the end of 2025. The subsidy cliff is back. Federal help cuts off above 400% of the federal poverty level, which is roughly $62,600 for a single person in 2026. Early retirees drawing from investment accounts can land just above that line without much effort. And if they do, their annual premiums could more than double. So the income you draw to pay your bills might accidentally push you above the subsidy cliff, making your healthcare even more expensive, which forces you to draw more income, which keeps you above the cliff. It's a trap that nobody explains to you until you're already in it. Silent drain number 3 is the one that nobody in financial media wants to talk about because it sounds conspiratorial. So I'm going to be boring and just give you the government's own numbers. A recent report by the Congressional Budget Office found that the Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will now run out of money in 2032, 1 year sooner than the trustees' report had previously found. That's not a fringe prediction. That's the CBO, the same office that scores legislation for Congress. After Social Security's trust funds are depleted, the only money available to pay Social Security benefits will be incoming payroll tax revenue. According to the 2025 trustees' report, this would be enough to cover 77% of scheduled benefits. In other words, if nothing else changes, there would be a 23% across-the-board Social Security benefit reduction. For a beneficiary receiving $2,000 a month, a 28% cut would mean losing $560 per month, leaving approximately $1,440. If you're counting on Social Security for a significant portion of your income, and most Americans are, that is not a rounding error. That is a structural shift in your monthly budget. Now let me bring all 3 silent drains together in one scenario that is extremely plausible for the kind of person watching this video. Here's the part that never makes it into a retirement calculator. Most people I talk to have a rough sense of their withdrawal rate and their Social Security number. But what they haven't modeled is the combination. What happens when all 3 variables hit you at once in the order they are most likely to actually happen. That's why I built something called the Exit Code. It's an 8-chapter digital book, not a course, not a community, not a coaching program built on 50 years of actual retirement data. I spent months combing through academic research, actuarial tables, and CBO projections to distill it into a mathematical framework that turns maybe someday into a specific date. 2 things I want to highlight for today's topic specifically. First, I covered what I call the 4% trap and the dynamic withdrawal method that replaces it. Because the problem isn't just using the wrong withdrawal rate, it's using a rigid withdrawal rate when your portfolio needs flexibility. The research shows that retirees who adjusted their spending even modestly during down years, pulling 3.5% instead of 4% during a bear market, significantly extended their portfolio's life. That's the dynamic approach. Second, the Exit Code covers what I call the 58% rule. The data on forced exits is sobering. More than half of retirees leave work earlier than planned, not by choice, but because of layoffs, health events, or caregiving demands. If that happens to you at 58 instead of 65, you've just added 7 years to the duration your money has to last and removed 7 years of contributions. The buffer strategy that protects against that specific scenario is in Chapter 4. You can get the whole thing for less than 1 dinner out through the link in the description. Every year you spend planning with the wrong framework compounds the problem. The math waits for no one. Now back to the scenario. Let me introduce you to a guy I'll call Marcus. He's 54 years old. He has $600,000 in a mix of retirement accounts and brokerage accounts. He earns $90,000 a year. He's planning to retire at 63. The conventional wisdom says he's in decent shape. $600,000 plus Social Security at full retirement age is workable. Here's what the conventional calculator didn't tell Marcus. He retired in the wrong year. The market dropped 22% in the first 18 months of his retirement. He kept pulling out $40,000 a year because that's what his budget required. By month 30, his $600,000 had become $430,000. Not just from the market, but because he was selling depreciated shares to fund his lifestyle. That's dollar cost ravaging. Those shares couldn't participate in the recovery. His effective withdrawal rate, based on the new lower portfolio value, was now 9.3%. Not 4, 9.3. Here's where it gets really interesting. Marcus hadn't factored in the healthcare costs. He retired at 63, not 65. 2 years of premiums for himself and his wife, roughly $52,000. That came out of the $430,000. Now he's at $378,000. And then at 67, Social Security as he knew it is not what it was. If no action is taken before 2033, the depletion of reserves in the retirement trust fund will result in an automatic 23% cut in benefits. Marcus was planning on $2,000 a month from Social Security. After the cut, that's $1,540, $460 less per month, $5,500 a year less in guaranteed income. He has to pull more from the portfolio to make up the gap. The portfolio shrinks faster. The countdown that he couldn't see is accelerating. Marcus isn't broke yet, but by 81, his model says he's looking at a near zero balance. And he's expected to live, statistically speaking, to 85. According to the Social Security Administration mortality tables, half of American men who have reached age 65 will live to at least age 85. That's the median. Half live longer than that. The Society of Actuaries estimates that a couple, both reaching age 65, has a 50% chance that one spouse will live to 93. So if Marcus has a wife, there's a 50-50 chance one of them is still around at 93. That's 30 years of retirement. With a portfolio that might be empty in 16, the two countdowns are not running in sync. And nobody told Marcus they wouldn't be. You think the savings gap is the problem, but actually, the problem is the assumption that saving enough to hit a number means you're done thinking. The number doesn't move once you retire. The variables around it never stop moving. Let me add one more layer that most people genuinely don't think about until it's too late. And this is the subplot nobody tells you about. There is this concept called longevity literacy. A 2025 TIAA Institute paper found that only 32% of respondents correctly answered a multiple choice question about the life expectancy of a 65-year-old. The rest either dramatically underestimated how long they'd live or had no idea. This matters psychologically because people who underestimate their lifespan systematically undersave and over-withdraw. They're not being irresponsible, they're solving the wrong equation. They think they're planning a 15-year retirement when they're actually funding a 25-year one. Only 27% of survey respondents selected the correct answer when asked how long an average 65-year-old man could expect to live. 32% thought the average man would live to age 80 15 more years. 23% believed only 10 more years. 10 more years. Imagine planning for 10 years of retirement and living for 25. That's not a math error. That's a life upended. And here's what makes it even stranger. The people who are most likely to live long are exactly the people who tend to be watching financial content on YouTube, building wealth, investing carefully, and staying healthy. Interestingly, those who are financially prepared for retirement are often the ones who live the longest. Wealth and good health are closely tied to lower mortality rates. So if you've saved diligently and stayed healthy, you're statistically more likely to reach your 90s or beyond. This extended lifespan means your savings need to last even longer. The better you've done financially, the longer your money has to last. The system is almost elegantly cruel. So you've got a group of people, let's say the top quartile of savers, who are more likely to live into their 90s, which means they need 30-plus year retirement portfolios, which means they face more sequence risk, more inflation drag, and more healthcare exposure than the actuarial tables designed for the median population. If you're doing well financially, you're not just facing the average problem. You're facing a harder version of it over a longer time horizon with more at stake. This is where it gets really interesting and where the standard advice completely breaks down. The mainstream response to all of this is max your 401k, hire a financial advisor, and trust the process. I have 10 plus years running my own business, surrounded by accountants and fiscal lawyers. I've had multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested for years. And the honest observation I'll share is this: most financial advisors are optimized to keep assets under management, which means they are structurally incentivized to show you rosy projections. A client who sees a 20-year runway in their portfolio doesn't panic and pull money out. A client who understands sequence risk and healthcare costs and Social Security timing in granular detail is a much harder client to manage. Not because advisors are bad people. The incentive structures are just misaligned with your actual need to stress test your model against reality. The advisor's model is built for the average case. You need a model built for your specific sequence, your specific health exposure, your specific Social Security timing strategy, and your specific withdrawal flexibility. Okay, here is the practical part. Let me give you a framework I call the 3 piles. Every dollar you have in retirement or heading toward retirement needs to be categorized into one of 3 piles. And the proportion between these piles is the actual lever you control more than any specific investment pick or market prediction. Pile 1 is your guaranteed income layer. This is money that pays you no matter what the market does. Social Security falls here. Pensions fall here, if you're lucky enough to have one. Fixed annuities fall here. The whole job of this pile is to make sure you can cover your baseline expenses, food, housing, utilities, healthcare minimums, without touching your investment portfolio. The bigger this pile, the less sequence risk matters. Because if the market collapses in year 2 of your retirement and you don't need to sell anything to pay your bills, the sequence of returns risk basically disappears. This is also why the Social Security timing decision is one of the most financially significant choices you will ever make. Claiming Social Security at 62 permanently cuts your monthly benefit by around 30%, and a future reduction would compound on top of that smaller base. People claim early because they think they'll die before they break even on the delayed payment. Most of them are wrong. And the people who are most likely to be wrong are, again, the healthy, wealthy people who tend to live the longest. Every month you delay Social Security between 62 and 70 increases your guaranteed income. Depending on your full retirement age, delaying from 62 to 70 can increase your monthly benefit by roughly 76%. That's not a market return. That's guaranteed. Government-backed income with a cost of living adjustment built in. The practical implication: if you're planning to retire before 70, the goal is to fund the gap years from savings so you can delay Social Security, not claim early because the money is sitting there. Use your savings to buy time so Social Security can grow. This is sometimes called the Social Security bridge strategy, and it is one of the least used, highest impact moves available to the average pre-retiree. Pile 2 is your flexible portfolio. This is your invested money, stocks, bonds, index funds, whatever your allocation looks like. The job of this pile is to grow faster than inflation over the long run and to support withdrawals when pile 1 doesn't fully cover your needs. The key word is flexible, not the 4% rule. A dynamic withdrawal rate that adjusts based on what the portfolio is actually doing in any given year. Morningstar's new safe starting withdrawal rate is 3.9% for a balanced retirement portfolio. Flexible withdrawal strategies like guardrails or RMDs can increase starting rates to about 6%. The difference between a rigid 4% and a flexible guardrails approach isn't just semantics. It's the difference between selling into a down market because your budget requires a fixed number and adjusting your spending temporarily so your portfolio has room to recover. Morningstar's 2025 research found that retirees who experienced poor returns in the first 5 years and did not adjust their spending were far more likely to go broke. The adjustment doesn't have to be dramatic. It might mean taking 1 fewer vacation. It might mean eating out fewer times per month. Small behavioral pivots in the early years of retirement can mean the difference between running dry and dying with money to spare. Pile 3 is your buffer. This is where most people have nothing, and it is the pile that saves you in a bad sequence scenario. You can shield your portfolio from stock market losses with a retirement strategy known as the bucket approach. Typically, you'll keep 1 to 2 years of living expenses in cash, which would be accessible during market dips. The buffer exists so that when the market drops 30% in year 1, you don't have to sell a single equity share. You live from cash for 18 months. The market recovers. Your portfolio participates in the recovery with all its shares intact. The sequence risk never gets a chance to compound. This is not complicated. It is boring. It requires discipline and foresight. And virtually nobody does it because retirement planners don't charge fees for helping you hold cash. Let me step back for 1 second and tell you a story about a woman named Eleanor, because it captures the psychology of this better than any statistic. Eleanor retired in 2008. She had watched the market for 30 years. She had $800,000 invested. She felt prepared. And then she watched her portfolio drop to about $500,000 in the span of 12 months during the financial crisis. What she did next is what matters. She panicked and moved everything to cash in early 2009, right at the bottom. She locked in the losses. She didn't participate in one of the most powerful bull market runs in history, which started in March of that same year. By 2019, her $800,000, had it stayed invested, would have been worth approximately $2,100,000. She had about $600,000 in a savings account. The problem wasn't that the market crashed. The problem was that she didn't have a buffer, a pile 3, to give her the psychological space to do nothing. When you have cash set aside specifically to fund 2 years of expenses during a downturn, the portfolio drop stops feeling like an emergency. It becomes an inconvenience. And inconveniences don't cause you to make decisions that permanently damage your financial future. Strategic protection demonstrates measurable results. Cash buffers show a 5 percentage point improvement in survival rates, while flexible withdrawal strategies eliminate failure risk entirely at withdrawal rates that devastate rigid approaches. 5 percentage points sounds small. Over $1 million portfolio, over 30 years, it is the difference between dying with $200,000 in the bank and dying with nothing. Now, here's where I come full circle to the 2 countdown problem. You can't control which countdown wins. You can't know in advance whether you'll live to 78 or 93. You can't predict whether you'll retire into a bull market or a bear market. You can't know whether Congress will fix Social Security or let it hit the cliff. What you can control is the structure of your plan, and specifically, how much of your essential spending is covered by guaranteed income before you ever touch your invested portfolio. The higher that percentage, the less all the other variables matter. The less sequence risk can hurt you, the less inflation erodes your runway, the less a healthcare cost spike derails the model. The people who sleep well in retirement are not the ones who picked the best stock 20 years ago. They are the ones who built a guaranteed income floor deep enough to absorb shocks, maintain enough flexibility in their investment withdrawals to breathe during bad markets, and held enough cash buffer to prevent panic decisions from becoming permanent losses. That's it. That's the system. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And the final observation I'll leave you with. The problem will only get harder and nastier as the oldest Gen Xers start to retire. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink wrote in his 2025 annual shareholders letter, they're the first generation primarily dependent on 401ks. The experiment of asking individuals to self-fund 30-year retirements using market-linked savings accounts with no floor underneath them other than a Social Security system that is 7 years from a structural cut is going to produce a lot of Raymonds and a lot of Marcuses. Don't be one of